A man will often push away the very person he itches to hold, not because he doesn't care, but because he cares so deeply that it terrifies him. Ladies and gentlemen, listen closely. Sometimes the strongest man in the room is the one who looks the most distant, not because his heart is empty, but because it is overflowing, and the weight of that emotion, love, fear, hope, vulnerability, can feel like too much to carry. A man may push you away right at the moment he wants you most. Why? Because wanting you exposes him. Because choosing you demands honesty. Because loving you requires him to confront the parts of himself he's kept hidden from the world. See, men are often taught to conquer, to win, to endure, but not to lean, not to trust, not to say, I'm scared I'm not enough for you. So instead of opening up, he retreats. Instead of speaking his truth, he builds walls. Instead of holding your hand, he hides his heart. When a man begins to experience emotions that run deeper than he expected, feelings that shake the foundation of the control he's used to, his instinctive response is often retreat rather than engagement. For many men, emotional overwhelm is not simply feeling too much. It is the internal collision of desire, fear, vulnerability, and uncertainty happening all at once. This experience can be so intense that it becomes physically uncomfortable. His chest tightens, his thoughts speed up, and he finds himself unable to express what's happening inside him. The very depth of his connection to someone can trigger a primal defense mechanism. Pull back before something goes wrong, not because he wants distance, but because the closeness has become a territory he doesn't know how to navigate. Deep emotions challenge him in ways logic cannot solve. When a woman touches parts of his heart that he had kept locked away, softness, tenderness, longing, he may feel as though he's losing his grip on the life he carefully manages. Suddenly, he is no longer the one in full command of his world. The emotional stability he's built begins to feel uncertain, and this uncertainty scares him. Men often associate control with safety, control over their decisions, their reactions, their environment. But emotional attachment, especially intense attachment, removes that control piece by piece. He can't predict her every reaction. He can't guarantee the future. He can't prevent pain or disappointment. All he knows is that he's invested, and that investment makes him vulnerable. The more he feels, the more he stands to lose, and that realization overwhelms him. What makes this emotional overwhelm more complicated is that many men were never taught to process emotion in a healthy, open way. Instead, they were taught to push through discomfort, bury difficult feelings, and maintain composure at all times. So when affection or love surges within him, he doesn't have a roadmap for how to handle it. He doesn't know how to say, this scares me, or I care about you more than I know how to handle. Instead, he feels pressure to remain calm and unaffected, even though he is anything but. This creates a storm inside him, a rush of emotion colliding with internal rules that tell him he is not supposed to feel this deeply. When his internal world becomes too loud, too contradictory, too unfamiliar, he steps back, not because he wants to escape you, but because he wants to escape the inner confusion he cannot name. Another reason emotions overwhelm a man is the sudden emergence of expectations. Expectations that may not even be spoken, but are deeply felt. If he realizes he truly wants you, truly values you, truly feels connected to you, then the relationship suddenly means something real. And when something is real, it carries responsibility. He worries about what it means for his future, whether he can meet your emotional needs, whether he can protect you, support you, and grow with you. The magnitude of the connection forces him to confront questions he doesn't feel prepared to answer. Rather than risk disappointing you or failing the relationship, his instinct may be to pull back until he regains emotional stability. It's not indifference, it's overwhelm disguised as distance. Furthermore, emotional overwhelm creates fear, and fear drives withdrawal. The fear is not always logical, it's not even always conscious. It can be fear of rejection, fear of not being enough, fear of getting hurt, fear of losing himself, fear of losing you, or even fear of how intensely he actually feels. Strong emotions make him aware of his own fragility, something he's spent years trying to hide or deny. For a man who prides himself on strength, the realization that someone has the power to affect him so deeply can be shocking. It can feel like stepping out onto thin ice. He worries that one wrong move, one misunderstanding, one mistake, one moment of vulnerability could shatter everything. So he retreats, hoping that by pulling back, he can regain the emotional equilibrium he lost. Finally, emotional overwhelm often pushes a man into self-preservation mode. When his heart moves faster than his mind is ready for, the safest choice, at least from his perspective, is distance. This distance allows him to process, to breathe, to sort through the chaos inside him. It's his way of regulating himself, even if it looks like rejection from the outside. He may genuinely want closeness, love, and connection, but the weight of those desires becomes too heavy to hold in the moment. So he pushes away not to escape the bond, but to protect himself from the turbulence of feeling too much, too fast. It's a temporary retreat meant to restore balance, not a permanent departure. In truth, the intensity of his feelings is usually a sign of how deeply he cares, even if he hasn't yet learned how to stay present. When the emotions rise beyond his comfort zone, many men grow up absorbing an unspoken rule: emotions are weaknesses, vulnerability is dangerous, and softness must be suppressed. These messages don't always come from harsh words. They're delivered through subtle cues, cultural expectations, role models who never cry, and praise that rewards toughness over truth. Over time, these lessons shape a man's internal framework. So when he begins to feel deeply for someone, those old rules rise to the surface and clash with what his heart wants. Vulnerability challenges the persona he's constructed, the steady mask he learned to wear for survival. When someone touches his emotions and awakens tenderness he has long hidden, it forces him into unfamiliar territory where his learned identity, strong, controlled, unshakable, no longer fits as neatly as it once did. Because men are conditioned to handle problems through action, logic, and solution-oriented thinking, emotional openness can feel like a foreign language. It demands that he sit with uncertainty instead of fixing it, that he share fears instead of silencing them, and that he express vulnerability without tangible outcomes. This emotional language is rarely taught, yet deeply expected in relationships. So when he falls for someone, he may find himself caught between what he feels and what he believes he's allowed to feel. This internal conflict makes him hesitate, retreat, or shut down completely. It's not that he lacks emotion. He feels more than he's comfortable showing. It's that the vulnerability required to express those emotions goes against the emotional rule book he has lived by. The moment a man realizes he could be loved for who he truly is, cracks begin to form in the armor he spent years building. And vulnerability is the tool that widens those cracks. To connect with someone sincerely, he must allow himself to be seen, not the polished version he presents to the world, but the real version beneath it. The fears, the insecurities, the dreams, the failures. This level of exposure can feel like stepping onto a stage without a script. The lack of control unnerves him. In vulnerability, he loses the ability to hide behind strength or silence, and confronting the possibility that someone might reject his true self can be overwhelming. Instead of risking that exposure, he may distance himself to regain the sense of stability the emotional connection has disrupted. Compounding the issue is the pressure many men feel to always appear competent and composed. When he begins to care deeply, he may worry that sharing his emotions will make him appear needy, weak, or uncertain. Traits he believes will diminish him in the eyes of the person he cares about. Even if this belief is untrue, it lives deeply within him, shaped by years of conditioning. The fear isn't irrational to him, it's protective. Vulnerability asks him to trust that he will not be judged for his honesty, but trust is not something he gives easily. Instead, he retreats in self-preservation, convinced that pulling back will maintain the respect, admiration, or dignity he fears losing. Ironically, the very thing that could deepen the connection, openness, is what frightens him enough to withdraw. There is also the fear of losing control over his emotions once they are exposed. Many men believe that if they allow themselves to open up, their emotions will flood uncontrollably, making them dependent, reactive, or overly invested. Vulnerability feels like handing someone else the power to affect his state of mind, a terrifying prospect for someone accustomed to emotional independence. The idea that someone else's words, actions, or presence could influence his inner world so strongly makes him uncomfortable. So instead of leaning into the emotion, he leans away from it. He creates distance not because he wants less, but because he feels too much. Vulnerability destabilizes him in ways he doesn't yet understand how to manage. And finally, vulnerability forces a man to confront the parts of himself he often keeps buried. Loving someone deeply doesn't just awaken tenderness. It awakens the insecurities he thought he outgrew, the fears he never resolved, the old wounds he never healed. A connection that matters acts like a mirror, reflecting not just his strengths, but also his shadows. When these unresolved inner tensions rise to the surface, it becomes overwhelming. He may not have the emotional tools to face them, let alone articulate them. Pulling away becomes a momentary escape from the introspection that vulnerability demands. Yet beneath the retreat is a simple truth: vulnerability is not his enemy. It is the doorway to the closeness he secretly desires, but has not yet learned how to accept. One of the deepest reasons a man pulls away, right at the moment he wants someone most, is rooted in a fear few men dare to say out loud: the fear of not being enough. This isn't a small insecurity, it's a quiet, powerful force shaped by years of expectations, comparisons, and silent pressures. When he begins to care deeply, this fear grows louder. Suddenly, every flaw feels magnified, every weakness feels exposed, and every shortcoming feels like a potential reason he could lose the connection he cherishes. Even if the person he cares about has never demanded perfection, he holds himself to a standard he believes he must reach to be worthy. And when love enters the picture, that standard climbs even higher, leaving him feeling inadequate long before anyone ever asks him to be more. Feeling not enough can take many forms. It might be financial, questioning whether he can provide, build, or achieve the life he believes he should. It might be emotional, wondering whether he has the capacity to open up, communicate, or support someone in the way they deserve. Or it might be psychological, doubting his ability to maintain a stable, meaningful relationship when he's still wrestling with battles no one sees. When these doubts rise, they don't appear as soft whispers. They hit him with the weight of responsibility, pressure, and self-judgment. Instead of seeing the relationship as something beautiful he can grow into, he starts seeing it as something he might fail at. And failure, especially in love, is the one area he fears most because it wounds him where his pride and heart intersect. This fear of inadequacy becomes even more intense when the connection is with someone he truly values. The more he respects her, admires her, or sees her as exceptional, the more he questions whether he has what it takes to meet her standards, real or imagined. This is where his retreat becomes paradoxical. The better the connection feels, the more unworthy he may feel. Instead of leaning in, he steps back, not because he doesn't desire closeness, but because he believes closeness will reveal too much. In his mind, distance protects him from being found out, from having his imperfections discovered, from disappointing someone he doesn't want to lose. It's not rejection, it's self-protection from imagined consequences he fears will hurt them both. Growing up, many men learn that their value is tied to what they can offer: strength, stability, solutions, success. Love challenges this belief. Love asks him not only what he can provide, but who he can be. And that shift terrifies him, because being enough in a relationship isn't about achievements or accomplishments. It's about authenticity, vulnerability, and emotional availability. These are areas where he may feel unskilled or unprepared. So instead of risking being exposed, he withdraws. The internal narrative becomes, if I step back now, before she relies on me, before she sees the real me, before she expects more of me, I can avoid failing her later. This narrative feels logical to him, even if it appears irrational from the outside. This fear of inadequacy is often tied to old wounds he hasn't healed. Past failures, broken relationships, moments where he felt inferior or overlooked, times he tried but wasn't enough for someone else. These experiences leave emotional fingerprints on his heart. So when a new connection begins to matter, those old fears resurface. He begins to assume that history will repeat itself, that he will fall short again. That love will reveal the flaws he hoped no one would notice. Withdrawal becomes a preemptive strike, a way to control the outcome before the outcome controls him. Deep down, he is not pushing the person away. He is pushing away the version of himself he worries might not measure up. And perhaps the most painful part is that he often hides this fear beneath a mask of indifference, business, or emotional distance. He rarely admits, even to himself, that the core issue is inadequacy. Instead, he convinces himself he's not ready, too overwhelmed, or better off alone, when the truth is that he fears he cannot live up to what love requires. But beneath the retreat lies a heart that cares intensely, a man who wants deeply, and someone who longs for connection, yet struggles to believe he deserves it. His distance is not the absence of feeling. It is the presence of fear, a fear not of love itself, but of failing in the one place he wants most to succeed. When a man begins to pull away, the most common assumption is that he has lost interest. But more often, the opposite is true. He is overwhelmed by how much he cares, and withdrawing is his way of protecting himself from emotional risk. He may not articulate this, but distance serves as his shield, a barrier between his heart and the vulnerability that scares him. This instinctive retreat is deeply rooted in the belief that protecting himself from hurt is more important than pursuing closeness. To him, stepping back creates a sense of safety, a temporary buffer that allows him to regain emotional control. It is not meant to sever the bond, but to stop his feelings from growing stronger than he believes he can handle. Pulling back is often triggered by the fear of emotional exposure. The deeper he feels, the more he realizes he has something to lose. A man who cares deeply becomes aware that his heart is no longer protected behind walls or independence. Suddenly, someone has the ability to impact him, his mood, his thoughts, his future. This realization can be frightening. Vulnerability feels dangerous because it means he must admit, even silently, that he wants connection, that he needs someone, that he values the relationship enough to risk heartbreak. The more meaningful the bond becomes, the more he fears losing it. So he distances himself as a way to minimize potential pain, believing that emotional space might keep him from falling too far, too fast. This distancing is not always a conscious choice. Often it's emotional reflex. Men are conditioned to retreat when they feel overwhelmed, to shut down when emotions become too complex, instead of coming forward with honesty. I'm scared. I care a lot. I don't want to get hurt. He withdraws and creates space. This behavior is not meant to punish or confuse the one he cares about. It's him reverting to what feels familiar. Emotional withdrawal gives him time to breathe, to recalibrate, to sort through his feelings without the pressure of immediate vulnerability. In his mind, stepping back gives him a sense of control over an emotional situation that suddenly feels too unpredictable. The irony is that his distance is often misinterpreted as a lack of care, when in truth it is the depth of his care that initiates the retreat. To him, closeness symbolizes risk of disappointment, risk of rejection, risk of not being enough, or risk of losing someone who matters. And because these risks feel so heavy, he may believe that pulling away is the safest option for both himself and the relationship. By retreating, he convinces himself he's preventing future hurt, even though the distance itself can cause confusion and pain. It is not rejection. It is self-preservation wrapped in silence, a misguided attempt to avoid emotional consequences before they can happen. Another layer to this behavior is the belief that emotional risk threatens his identity. Many men tie their worth and stability to their ability to remain strong, secure, and unaffected. When he feels too deeply or becomes emotionally dependent, he may feel as though he is losing control of himself. He fears that vulnerability will make him appear weak or exposed. Instead of allowing the connection to deepen naturally, he steps back to maintain the emotional discipline he prides himself on. Distance becomes a way to preserve the version of himself he is most familiar with. The man who does not need anyone, the man who can walk away before feelings cloud his judgment, the man who keeps his heart guarded. Even if he longs for closeness, the fear of losing his emotional footing can overpower the desire to stay present. Ultimately, pulling back is his attempt to manage emotions that feel bigger than he expected. It is not about caring less. It is about caring too intensely and not knowing how to handle it. When he retreats, it's because the emotional territory has become too vulnerable, too unpredictable, too powerful for him to navigate comfortably. His withdrawal is a protective reflex, not a reflection of his true intentions. Beneath the distance is a man trying to protect a heart he rarely shows, a man who feels safer behind emotional armor, and a man who hasn't yet learned that the connection he fears losing is the very thing he secretly wants to lean into. Love has a way of exposing a man to parts of himself he rarely confronts, and one of the strongest truths is that real connection demands courage. Not the loud, performative kind, but the quiet, internal bravery that forces him to face uncertainty and discomfort. When a man cares deeply, staying emotionally open requires far more strength than shutting down. It means letting someone see the parts of him that aren't polished or perfect. It requires stepping out of the emotional habits he's relied on his entire life. This shift from comfort to courage isn't natural for many men. It takes deliberate effort. When he begins to feel something real, he instinctively gravitates toward what feels familiar: independence, control, emotional distance. Moving beyond that takes a level of courage he's still learning to access. Choosing courage over comfort means accepting that love can be unpredictable. He can't plan it, strategize it, or guarantee it. And unpredictability can feel threatening to a man who prides himself on control and certainty. Comfort tells him to stay guarded, to protect his emotions, to remain safe within the boundaries of what he knows. Courage asks him to step beyond those boundaries even when he doesn't feel fully prepared. It asks him to keep showing up even when it scares him. It asks him to stop running from emotional intensity and start learning how to manage it. This transition is challenging because comfort is soothing, predictable, and familiar, while courage feels risky but necessary for growth. A man stepping into emotional courage also has to face the fear of being wrong about himself, wrong about how much he can handle, wrong about whether he is as emotionally limited as he once believed. He may have spent years convincing himself that he isn't built for deep relationships, or that getting too close always ends badly. Love contradicts these beliefs. It asks him to rewrite the story he's told himself, and rewriting that story requires humility. It requires him to admit that he may have misunderstood his own heart. Courage isn't the absence of fear, it's the decision to move through fear when something meaningful is on the other side. When a man cares deeply, his heart pushes him toward that courage even when his habits pull him toward retreat. Stepping into courage also means letting go of the need to appear invulnerable. Many men are taught that showing emotion makes them weak, and that fear or uncertainty is something to hide. But love demands emotional presence. It requires him to talk about his feelings, express his fears, and share his intentions. This emotional transparency can feel like walking into territory without armor. He worries that being honest about his insecurities will make him seem less masculine or less desirable. Yet real connection thrives on truth, not pretense. Courage asks him to show up authentically, even when he feels unpolished. It asks him to trust that openness won't make him lose respect, but instead deepen the relationship. Another aspect of courage is staying when uncomfortable emotions arise, when misunderstandings happen, when doubts creep in. When the relationship becomes complicated, his instinct might be to retreat. Running from discomfort is easy. Staying through it is difficult. Love requires consistency, communication, and emotional endurance. It asks him to work through issues rather than shutting down. It asks him to stay present even when the situation triggers old fears. This is where courage shines the most, choosing to stay connected rather than shutting down when emotions get heavy. He has to learn that conflict or vulnerability is not a threat, but a natural part of building something meaningful. Ultimately, choosing courage over comfort is what transforms a man from someone who withdraws when feelings intensify into someone who grows through them. This process doesn't happen overnight. It requires patience with himself, awareness of old habits, and the willingness to build new emotional muscles. Courage means accepting that love is not something he can control, only something he can participate in. It means acknowledging that the discomfort he feels is not a sign to pull away, but a signal that he is stepping into deeper emotional territory. And as he learns to navigate this, he discovers that the risk of vulnerability is often what allows him to experience the kind of connection he always wanted but never believed he could sustain. Love is one of the few forces powerful enough to shake a man out of the emotional patterns he has relied on his entire life. It challenges him in ways that no achievement, competition, or responsibility ever could. When a man begins to care deeply, he realizes that love demands a courage far greater than anything he has shown in the external world. It requires him to step into emotional territory where his usual strengths, logic, control, independence, offer little protection. Love asks him to trust, to open up, to soften, to let someone see the unpolished version of himself. These demands push him far beyond what feels comfortable, and stepping into that space requires a bravery he may not feel ready to reveal. comfort for many men is built upon predictability. They feel safe when they know what to expect, when life follows a structure they understand. But love disrupts that structure. It introduces uncertainty. It challenges him to let go of the armor that has kept him emotionally safe. Comfort tells him to remain guarded, to stay composed, to limit vulnerability. Love tells him the opposite. Show yourself, all of yourself. And in that moment, he realizes comfort and connection cannot coexist. To love someone deeply means accepting emotional exposure, unpredictability, and the possibility of heartache. This crossroads forces him to choose between what feels safe and what feels meaningful. Courage in love is not dramatic or grand. It is quiet, consistent, and deeply internal. It shows up when he chooses to share what scares him instead of shutting down. It appears when he admits he cares, even if he fears rejection. It manifests when he communicates instead of disappearing, when he stays present despite discomfort, when he chooses honesty over avoidance. This type of courage is foreign to many men because it is not the kind they were raised to develop. They were taught to be brave in action, not emotion. So when love requires bravery of the heart rather than bravery of the hands, he must learn an entirely new form of strength. Yet love does not only demand courage, it rewards it. But the reward is not immediate. When he steps beyond comfort, he doesn't suddenly feel relaxed or confident. In fact, the first steps into vulnerability often feel like stepping into fire. His thoughts race, his instincts resist, his fears fight back. But something deeper inside him begins to grow, an inner resilience built from truth rather than avoidance. Each time he expresses something real, each time he stays instead of runs, each time he opens up instead of shutting down, he becomes more capable of emotional maturity. Love, in this sense, becomes not just a relationship, but a path of growth he never expected to walk. However, stepping beyond comfort does not mean eliminating fear. A man can feel terrified and still choose connection. He can feel overwhelmed and still move toward the one he cares for. The courage required in love is not the absence of fear, but the decision to act in spite of it. And that decision becomes the defining test of the relationship. He learns that intimacy is built not on perfection, but on presence. Not on certainty, but on willingness. Not on comfort, but on courage. When he begins to understand this, he starts to realize that the emotional risk he feared is the same risk that allows love to grow stronger. In the end, the greatest relationships are not created by men who feel entirely ready or fearless. They are created by men who choose to show up even when it scares them. Love asks him to stretch, to evolve, to rise above the limitations comfort has imposed on him. It demands a bravery deeper than any he has shown in the outside world. And while he may resist at first, the moment he embraces this truth is the moment he discovers that love was never meant to be comfortable. It was meant to be transformational. And so, if you've ever watched a man pull away right when the connection felt the strongest, understand this: his distance was never the absence of feeling. It was the presence of battles. He didn't know how to fight in front of you. He wasn't pushing you away because you didn't matter. He was pushing you away because you mattered more than he knew how to handle. Men don't retreat from indifference. They retreat from intensity, from truth, from emotion that shakes them deeper than they expected. But here's the lesson in all of this. A man doesn't grow when he's comfortable. He grows when connection asks more of him. More honesty, more courage, more vulnerability than he's ever shown before. And when he finally steps forward, when he chooses bravery over fear, openness over armor, truth over silence, that's when you'll meet the real him. Not the guarded version, not the distant version, but the man who has learned that love isn't a threat to his strength. It's the revelation of it. So if you've ever felt pushed away, remember this: it wasn't because you weren't enough. It was because he was learning how to become enough. Not for the world, but for someone he never expected to care for so deeply. And sometimes that's the journey a man must take before he can finally stay.